Hello, my friends, and welcome once again to 7 True Scary Stories from Reddit. There's nothing more bone-chilling than a creepypasta or scary story, but is it even more frightening if those stories are real and could possibly happen to you? Here's 7 true scary stories from Reddit users. When I was little, around 8, I hated going to the dentist. He always made me feel uncomfortable for some reason. I remember thinking his smile stretched too far and seemed forced, like a clown's. Anyway, my mom always came with me and went back so I wouldn't be scared. One day, my dad had me, divorced parents, and had to take me to the dentist, but tried to make me go back alone so he could sit out in the lobby doing whatever. The assistants had to literally drag me back to the room, and you could hear me screaming and crying down the hall, refusing to sit in the chair. Finally, my dad came back to get me. Irritated, I made a scene. He rescheduled my appointment to when my mom would have me, and we just left. He made a big deal about how bad I was acting, and told my mom she was spoiling me and all sorts of stuff. 2 weeks later, it's on the news that my dentist was charged with child pornography after molesting children under anesthesia and photographing it. I lived in a small college town, and my apartment complex was in walking distance from the bar in downtown area. One weekday night, I stepped out on the front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me, and I stayed down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl who I had never met, but who lived one apartment over, but down on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself, and you can tell from the way she was walking that she had been drinking. She got into her apartment, and barely got the door closed before some guy, who came out of nowhere, knocked on her door. She opened the door, and I noticed he introduced himself, which was weird because it was after 2:30 a.m. Who comes to a strange girl's apartment at that time? So I decided to stay outside and pay attention. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later acknowledged how weird the situation was, but didn't know how to end the conversation. He would do the creepiest things, like he reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times, and would try to slowly inch his way closer to her and the door. I made a point of being very loud with my textbook so he would know I was there, and he disappeared as eerily as he had come. We called the cops, and days later, they had the girl and me sit down with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, floods of calls came in. The guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab offering them a ride. This girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars. He didn't get a chance to pull the cab routine on her. When I was a kid, I was always the last kid picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day, I was waiting for the bus by myself, and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now. Just get on." He got more and more pushy, but didn't do anything crazy. I just kept saying no, and he shrugged and left. The real bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school, and my parents didn't know until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls. In a cold winter night in a remote village from Quebec, Canada, in 1990, me and my 2 brothers were asleep. We were 1, 3, and 6 years old. In the middle of the night, someone entered our house without knocking, walked around and was talking to himself. Our house is 2 miles from the village in a rural area. My father woke up, went to the living room where the guy was. He had been in a car accident 1 mile from our house with his buddy, who had died instantly, and his scalp had fell in front of his face. So the first time my father saw him, he saw a man with no face in his house. He was drunk and his body was frozen. He was speaking to himself. "Je vais mourir, je vais mourir," which means, "I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die." The fact that his face was partially frozen might have saved his life, preventing him to lose too much blood. My father took him to the hospital 25 kilometers from our house, by car, and he did survive. To this day, my father is still blessing the fact that we never woke up during the night with all the noise. We were partying at our usual party spot by the river, and some dude came out of the woods. He just kept saying weird stuff like, "You gotta watch yourself down here. There are some bad folks around here." And when we asked who he was, he said, "I'm nobody." We were all a little sketched out, and basically told the guy to go home. A couple days later, a girl went off the rope swing, and she got really messed up. Someone put fishing hooks all over the bottom of the rope swing, and it took out chunks of flesh from her leg. Later, we found out the dude was just a guy that lived nearby, and although he was kind of a creepy drunk, he was harmless. There was, however, a probably very inbred family that lived up the road that he would warn people about. About 5 years later last year, they beat up some kid with a log and kidnapped some girl at gunpoint and took her on a joyride. Edit note, the Reddit user has put proof of their story in the form of a news article. The link is in the description below, which you may read at your leisure. This happened to a friend of mine's housemate during their time at university. It was at the house she lived in before moving in with my friend after this event occurred. During her second year at university, she lived in a house with 3 other people. At Easter, everyone went back home to their parents for the Easter holidays. Her first night back after returning from Easter break, she woke up in the morning to find some things moved about in her bedroom. She thought nothing of it and put it down to moving it herself the night before and not remembering. She woke up the next morning to more stuff moved around, like her TV and chair. She started to get a bit scared and told her housemates to quit moving her stuff because it wasn't funny and was getting kind of creepy. They all said they didn't touch anything. The next morning, even more stuff had been moved around, and she started to get very worried. Again, she told her housemates to stop, but they swore they hadn't touched anything and were getting very concerned themselves. The 4th night, she woke up during the middle of the night. She looked over in the darkness. She could see a figure sitting at her desk. She freaked out, ran out of the room, locked the door, and called the police. The police turned up and unlocked the door. Sure enough, there's a guy there, probably early 20s, sitting at her desk, calm as anything. The police arrest him and take him away. A couple days later, they find out that the guy was actually a mentally handicapped person who lived at a care home not far from the road. His mother, who was his full-time carer and looked after him until his death a year or so earlier, was when he had moved into the home. He had been a missing person for a few weeks now, and it turned out that the house this girl and her friends lived in used to be him and his mother's house. In particular, her bedroom used to be his. He eventually told the police that he ran away from home. His old house was where he went to. He managed to get in somehow and spent the whole time there. 2.5 weeks, sleeping under the girl's bed, coming out at night while she slept to move her stuff. So it was like how he had it when it was his bedroom. Safe to say, she moved straight out of there, and that's when she moved in with my friend. My grandfather owns several forests around the village he lives in, and drives through them every week to check on how the trees are doing and whether something needs to be fixed. He really loves his trees and has a sharp eye for any potential sickness or insect that could pose a threat. A decade or 2 ago, hitchhikers were very common, even in the thinly populated areas of Bavaria. He encountered them regularly and was always happy to help. He literally picked up every single hitchhiker he found. One day, however, he had a bad feeling about one. Without any reason, he dismissed this one hitchhiker standing on the side of the path. Later that day, there was a radio broadcast about a previously convicted murderer who killed someone in the woods and got caught trying to flee by hopping into someone's car. Just writing it down makes me shudder again. Side note, extra 1,000 points for this Redditor comment that's on the bottom of it that says, I think your grandfather is Peter Parker, because that is top-notch Spidey sense right there. All of these stories were taken from a thread on Reddit. If you'd like to read these or other stories, the link is in the description below. That's all the time I have for today, my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening. I'm Amori. Now, listen to the spooky tunes. Hello, my friends, and welcome. I don't know.